might not believe what the simple act of courage was that made Rosa Parks an American hero. Well, here it is. On December 1st, 1955, in Montgomery, Alabama, Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on a bus so a white man could sit down. And for not getting up, she was arrested and taken to jail. The peaceful revolution that began that day is called the modern civil rights movement. Do you know what the term civil rights means? Civil rights are the liberties and freedoms all citizens of the United States share. But for many African Americans, those rights never really existed. They were slaves, the property of their owners. They had no rights at all. And even after slavery was abolished in 1865, many black people were still denied their rights. You see, in the southern states where slavery had existed, new laws were passed to keep blacks and whites apart. The word for separating white people and black people is segregation, and there were many segregation laws throughout the South. They were called Jim Crow laws. Jim Crow was a popular fictional character who was very insulting to black people. The name Jim Crow became a symbol of segregation throughout the South. So there were Jim Crow laws that set up separate schools for blacks and whites, separate trains, separate bathrooms, separate everything. That was what life was like when Rosa Parks was born in Alabama on February 4th, 1913. Her name was Rosa Macaulay then.
Well, I grew up in a little town in Alabama called Pine Level. I lived with my mother and brother and grandparents. My grandmother had been born a slave. I can remember when I was a little girl listening to my mother tell me stories. Her mother had told her about slavery.
She and other black children went to one school, and white children went to another.
Schools may have been separate, but they were never equal. The schools for white children had glass windows. Ours had wooden shutters. And some of the white children rode to school on buses. We walked.
When Rosa was about 11, she and her mother and brother moved to Montgomery. It was a big city. Now she had to deal with segregation laws that didn't even exist in a small town like Pine Level. For example, when black people got on city buses, they had to sit in the back, and all public water fountains had signs that said white and colored. Colored and Negro were the terms used then.
The thing I remember most about the water fountains, and I think all black children probably wondered the same thing, was if the white water tasted different from the colored water. Did colored water come in different colors? Well, it took me a while to understand. It wasn't the water that was different. It was who got to drink it.
On December 1st, 1955, Rosa Parks was on her way home from her job at the Montgomery Fair department store. She took the same bus that she took every night. After paying her fare, Rosa took a seat in the middle section of the bus. That was allowed as long as there were no white people to occupy them. She sat next to a black man. Two black women were sitting across the aisle. At the next stop, some white people got on and filled up the remaining seats. But one man was left standing. The driver looked back and saw him.
Let me have those seats.
Nobody moved.
You all better make it light on yourself and let me have those seats.
The two women across the aisle and the man sitting next to Rosa got up, but Rosa didn't.
Are you going to move?
No.
Then I'll have to have you arrested.
You may do that.
Eventually, two policemen came. They asked Rosa why she wouldn't get up.
Why don't you do as you're told and get up?
Why you all push us around?
I don't know. But the law is the law, and you're under arrest.
Rosa was arrested and taken to jail. Then she was given a date for her trial and released. News of what happened spread quickly.
You have to understand, that probably no segregation law angered black people in Montgomery more than bus segregation. The indignity of having to ride segregated buses was very humiliating.
The NAACP had wanted to challenge the bus laws for many years. Now they had their opportunity. The next day they called for all blacks to boycott the buses on the day of the trial to show support for Rosa. At church on Sunday, the day before the trial, most of the black ministers spoke about the boycott from their pulpits. Notices were posted around the city and in the newspaper. The black-owned taxicab companies agreed to pick up passengers at the bus stops so people could get to work, but no one was sure if the boycott would be successful.
We didn't know how many people were willing to take part in such a protest. Well, Monday morning, the day of the trial, we had our answer. The buses were practically empty. People had finally had enough. It was a surprise to everybody, I think. It was certainly a surprise to me.
While the boycott went on outside, inside the courthouse, Rosa had her trial. As expected, she was found guilty of violating the segregation laws. The fine was $10 plus $4 in court costs. Later that day, the city's black leaders formed a new organization, the Montgomery Improvement Association. They chose as their president a young pastor who was new to Montgomery, the Reverend Martin Luther King, Jr. A few days later, the association presented 3 demands to the Montgomery City Council and the bus company. Each demand was turned down.
So, the boycott began. It went on for 13 months. Instead of riding the buses, people walked or took cabs or shared rides. A lot of people lost their jobs, including me and Parks.
In February 1956, the city found an old law that said that boycotts were illegal. Martin Luther King and some others, including Rosa, were arrested.
Well, by this time, the Montgomery boycott was starting to attract attention around the country. The picture of me being fingerprinted was on the front page of the New York Times.
All of these arrests brought a lot more attention to Montgomery, the boycott, Dr. King, and Rosa Parks, some of it violent. There were death threats and bombings, but no matter what the other side did, the protesters never used violence. Soon, other black communities decided to follow Montgomery's example. While all of this was going on, Rosa's case was moving through the courts. Eventually, the case reached the Supreme Court. On November 13, 1956, the court ruled that the law under which Rosa Parks had been arrested was unconstitutional. Segregated buses became a thing of the past. 9 years later, President Lyndon Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Segregation in all public places was officially illegal everywhere in America. Soon after the boycott ended, Rosa and Raymond Parks moved to Detroit, where they continued to work to end discrimination and prejudice. Over the years, Rosa received many honors and awards. President Bill Clinton presented her with the nation's highest tribute. And today, on the spot where Rosa Parks boarded a bus in 1955, where she would not get up and where she was arrested, there stands a statue of her, the woman who has become known as the mother of the Civil Rights Movement, a symbol of freedom to people everywhere, a true American hero.